and welcome to another video. Now this is going to be everything that I got for this first half of May, and whilst there is quite a bit, hopefully it won't take too long to actually get through it all. This year is really going by very quickly. I can't believe it's already, midpoint through May, but rather than spend too long on this intro, I'll just get straight into it, and I hope you guys enjoy. So first of all, I'm going to show off the anime, the first being which is the recent UK release of Snow White with the red hair. A show that was also just somewhat recently released in the US, and is pretty much an identical copy for it, aside from this is a Blu-ray only release. There's no DVDs in here, and of course it contains all the relevant BBFC logos and that sort of thing. If you're not familiar with this show, it's somewhat of a just very light slice of life-esque fantasy romance shoujo, and it's really sweet. My sister in particular just adores it. She would always, if ever we were late in watching an episode, she was like, we have to watch the new, we have to. And she's like, it fulfills all my Disney princess dreams. But it basically follows the story of Shiroyuki, who runs away from her home country after she finds out she's going to be forced to marry the prince of that country due to her unusual and beautiful red hair. So she cuts her hair, runs away, and runs into a group of people in the forest, one of whom is Zen, and she finds out that he is also a crowned prince, but of a neighboring country. And when he finds out sort of what happens, he offers her pretty much sanctuary in his country at the castle, and so she joins him and the people he is with, who are his guards, and she's actually going to, I'm not entirely sure the term they use, but it's sort of like a herbalist. She works with plants as a doctor, basically, doctor types in these fantasy monarchy sort of settings, and that's what she was doing before she left her home country, and now she's come to the palace to actually formally train. So the story balances itself between that sort of her establishing herself within the palace and training and wanting to be the best that she can be, as well as the romantic aspect. There's also, for something that's so soft and light and fluffy, there is quite a bit of plot and short-lived conflict in this series. There is 2 seasons for this, so I am not entirely sure what happens in both, because I've seen both, or what happens in this one particularly. But it's a great show. I'm so glad to have it. I know the US just recently got the release of the 2nd season, and whenever I get that will be whenever. I'm not in a super rush to get this series, just because it's a pretty standard release, but the show itself is definitely one I would recommend, especially if you're into these more fantasy shoujo-esque series. Sort of, it reminds me a lot of The World is Still Beautiful, although that's maybe not the best comparison. It does remind me quite a bit of that series, which is another great series, by the way, if you haven't seen it and you're into fantasy romance stuff. The other anime that I got is actually a film, and this is a recent, I bought this recently to sort of fill the gaps in my Ghibli collection. So obviously that's it's a Ghibli film, and that is Ponyo, one of Miyazaki's final films, although not his final. I have never been a super huge fan of Ponyo. When it was first released in Japan, a bunch of my friends were in Japan due to like language, high school trip sort of stuff, language exchange, and they saw this film, and like the theme song was basically the theme song of their whole trip. So they have like this very high adoration for this film, but I don't have those same associated memories. It's a sweet film, but I think it's quite uneven, and it is very, it's very obviously a children's film. It is very juvenile and simplistic. Not to say it's a bad film, but it means that like there's not a huge amount that I personally get out of this film. It's cute, it's fine, but it's definitely not my favorite Ghibli film by a long shot. I saw this film in cinemas, although that was the dub when it came out here in Australia, and I don't think I've seen it since, so I will rewatch it, hopefully sometime in the future, and maybe my opinion of it has changed, because it's been, this came out whenever it was, like 2011? 2008, of course. Why did I say 2011? I just said I was in high school. 2008, which is, almost 10 years ago now. So I'm sure that my opinion will probably have changed. I don't know whether that's for the better or for the worse, but we'll see. But like I said, I got this purely because I wanted to sort of finish filling the gaps in my Ghibli collection. I only have technically 3 films left until I'm up to date with all of the Ghibli films, and that's The Cat Returns and also Pompoko. If I wanted to be incredibly inclusive, that I would also be looking at getting Ocean Waves once a Blu-ray release was done here, but I hate that movie so much, so I will probably not be buying it down the line. In saying that, I do have majority of the Ghibli films, and I have different reasons for enjoying all of them. Ponyo is definitely not my favorite, but it's sweet. It's, very simple, and like I said, I do need to rewatch it again to sort of figure out how I feel about it now as a much older person than I was when I first saw it. And next is Manga. There is a little bit to get through, but not a huge amount, so hopefully this won't take too long. So first of all is a volume of just sort of another thing I bought to fill in gaps, and that is volume 4 of Ojin. If you've seen any of my previous videos, or if you've seen my recent manga collection videos, this is in that video, but I've had 1 to 3 and then volume 5 for I haven't had 3 for a long time, but I've had 1, 2, and 5 for a very long time, and 3 I recently picked up in one of the previous pickup videos. So volume 4 means I no longer have any gaps between, 2 and 5, but that's not to say I'm up to date with the series. I'm sure lots of you know there is actually 9 volumes of this series out currently in English, 10 in Japanese, so I'm about halfway there. It's a series that I've kept up to date with through the Crunchyroll manga app. So there hasn't been a huge push for me to buy it, but I enjoy it a lot, and I do want to reread it and have the security of being able to read it whenever I want and having it on the shelf. It's definitely shelf worthy in my opinion. And I like to support Vertical's releases. They license some really good stuff, a lot of stuff that I'm particularly fond of. So yes, yeah, volume 4 of Ojin Demi-Human. Oh, there's the back. Next is a volume from one of my most highly anticipated series. Whenever a new volume comes out, it's always my favorite thing. And that is volume 6 of Requiem for the Rose King by Aya Kano. I've spoken a lot on my adoration for this series. I really appreciate what Kano has been doing with her story. It's a perfect blend between like the Shakespearean tragedy that, you know, majority of the story, like historical and Shakespearean tragedy that the story is set in, whilst also having such compelling characters that are very, very morally grey on both sides. It's very, very, very good. I think it perfectly encapsulates how these sorts of stories can be done so well in manga. Manga is a very expressive sort of medium, as with a lot of things that have actual like drawings or art in it. It creates a different sort of atmosphere than maybe just reading it on your own, although that's not to knock novels. I'm a huge fan of novels and have been reading for a very, very long time. But it's a different experience, and it definitely helps when a artist can put so much of themselves into the artwork and just create a scene visually as well as through the writing. They're two very different and distinct disciplines, and it's very hard to be to execute them well. But Kano always has some very interesting like gender discussion and exploration in her stories. And this one is no different. It's one of the things that initially drew me to this particular story, but I would highly recommend it to anyone who has sort of any interest in Shakespeare or the War of the Roses, that sort of historical setting. It is very, very, very good, and yeah, horrifying, very thrilling, gripping, just, oh, it's so good, guys. Next is another new release. This one is from a series I'm sure majority of people have heard of or are following or are buying or whatever, especially due to the recent anime and the current season of anime, and that is My Hero Academia Volume 8. I've spoken about My Hero Academia before in that I really enjoy how earnest it is. It's there's nothing nothing hidden in this story. It doesn't try to pretend to be too clever, or it's not, the setting itself isn't super original. And I said this in my longer manga video, but the execution of it is done so well, and the characters are written so likably and with so much personality that you really do get very invested. The actual arcs within the series are very fun, and very compelling. It's just a really fun series. I don't think, it needs to be anything more than it is. It does what it does incredibly well. It excels at it, really. And it's just, like, it's always fun reading this series. Even when it's, like, dramatic or something, you know, bad is happening, you always, there's always, like, underlying hope. It really does sort of play to the best fundamental part of, like, Caped Hero comics, in that you know, heroes are going to save the day. It's like the fundamental understanding of this sort of genre. And Horikoshi does a really great job in encapsulating that, not only as like with the series itself, but within the series, with Deku as such a adamant lover and fan of superheroes and adoration for the job. It's just really, really, it's nice to see. Not everything has to be, you know, grim and awful and dark to be saying something about society and like how these sorts of characters are presented. So, My Hero Academia, lots and lots of fun. Always great when we're getting a new volume. And yeah. Back of the book. Next is another new release. Another series that is just very fun, is executed very, very well, great characters. Again, it's all stuff I've said over and over and over again. With this series, even more so because it is a monthly release, and that is the most recent volume of Haikyuu by Haruichi Furudate. Yeah, again, the season 2 stuff, if you've seen the anime, and just, I don't know what to say. If you're not reading this series at this point, there's not much I can say to convince you. It's just done very, very well. You can tell that Furudate definitely has a love for the sport, has a love for the characters that he's created, and not just with the main characters, but all of the characters, all of these students who are playing volleyball. And you can definitely see and also understand like the adoration and joy of the sport within the series. Yeah, basically just has more training camp stuff, and yeah, again, if you've seen the show, that's season 2 stuff, and if you're a fan, you're already buying this. If you're not, then it's a really solid, fun sports manga. It's not perfect, but I think it does what it sets out to do perfectly. Which may be contradictory, but I don't care. Yeah, as I said, it's not without its problems. For each person that will be something different, but it's very funny, and it's again something that just leaves you happy at the end of it, regardless of the actual events going on within the series. There's always this underlying strain of hope and sort of love of the sport. Next is 2 volumes from a older series, one that I sort of semi-put onto my completion challenge for this year. Although it's not formally part of it, it is one I hope to sort of try and get lots of the volumes for this year. I want to try and finish it, but it's not a huge deal if I don't. And that is volume 9 and 10 of Pandora Hearts. The Wizard of Oz, that's not correct. The Alice in Wonderland themed sort of steampunk shonen story by Jun Mochizuki. It's been a long time since I've read any Pandora Hearts, but it is very enjoyable from what I remember of it. Mochizuki definitely has a thing for character and set design, or scene design maybe is probably a better word when we're talking about manga. But despite being sort of Alice in Wonderland inspired, it's not reliant on that sort of gimmick, unlike some series that sort of use that same idea. It is pretty, like, it's a pretty good balance between the sort of darker combat, battle-y, psychological parts of the story, as well as the mystery elements that go along with it, and the comedy is pretty good for what it is. I whilst I wouldn't say that this and Black Butler are extremely similar, they are similar in that they appeal to the same sort of demographic, and they are sold to, like, they're not the same magazine, but they're magazines that sort of appeal or are aiming towards a certain subset of fans. And so, like, this series and Black Butler as well are definitely ones that are they're shonen stories, but they're written with female fans in mind. Not necessarily like fujoshi, but just, I mean, they finally figured out that women pay money for things as well. So these sorts of stories are definitely ones that you can see them trying to appeal to a larger demographic within shonen, which is not a bad thing. I think Mochizuki has some very interesting stylistic things in both her writing and her artwork. And I look forward to reading more of this series because I hear it is very, 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 very good. Vanitas, her most recent series, the case study Vanitas, is also very good. Again, steampunk sort of aesthetic and inspired world. And one that is quite enjoyable to read, although that one has sort of just only started. But yes, 9 and 10 of this series means I'm not quite halfway through yet. There's 24 volumes in this series. So, yeah, we'll see if I'll get any more soonish, hopefully, but either way, not a huge deal. Next is another new release, one that I have been anticipating for months and months and months and months and months. Pretty much ever since it was announced as licensed, I've been chomping at the bit to get this finally released this month. And that is Pantheon's release of My Brother's Husband, Volume 1 by Gengoro Tagame. So this is the omnibus version of the first 2 volumes. The series itself just recently finished, so it is 4 volumes in all, meaning we'll get 2 of these omnibuses. And Pantheon did a great job with this release, although I was quite surprised that it was like a standard trim size height. As you can see, like I'm so used to hardcovers being larger. But this, if you have no idea what this story is, little bit of background. Gengoro Tagame is a very, very well-known and influential gay comic artist. If you don't know what that means, it's basically gay comics or, you know, male homosexual comics written by gay men for gay men, comparatively to like BL and Yaoi, which is you know, homosexual relationships written by women for women. So it's a different demographic, like it's written for a different subset of people, basically. So they handle different topics. Tagame is very, I think he's probably the most well-known gay comic artist in the West. He is extremely well-known for his very, very explicit sort of manga that he does. And of course, like with most gay comic artists, there's much more focus of like very large, muscular men, like very solid, hairy, which in comparison to like what you see in BL is very different. But of course is reflective of what, you know, the audience prefers and wants to read and see and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, My Brother's Husband is his first family-friendly title. And it is also, it's probably, I mean, it's hard to really recommend Tagame's work to people because it is extremely explicit, typically. So, although he does have quite a few things that have been published in English, so if you are interested in reading more of his work, there is plenty available. But but this story follows a Japanese man and his daughter, somewhat recently divorced. They live together, and then their life is sort of interrupted by the appearance of his Canadian brother-in-law. And so his twin brother, Ryuji is his name, moved to Canada after he, told him he was gay, and then whilst he was in Canada, married this lovely man, Mike. And since then, I don't know exactly how many years it's been since then, he subsequently died. So Mike has come to Japan to sort of pay his respects to Ryuji's family and discover more about Japan, his hometown, and sort of about the person he loved, and try and reconnect with him and mourn him through discovering, this new culture. It's such a good series. I really recommend this one. Konna, the little girl here, she sort of acts as the main, don't want to say audience for this series, but this series is much more an exploration of family, but also encourages the audience to question prejudices they might not even realize they have, and having this child sort of question things about homosexuality, because she's just learning, she doesn't really know, means that it doesn't come across as super clunky, and it also is done in a very realistic way without getting too preachy. That's another problem that a series like this can get into. It never feels like you're being talked down to, or anything like that. It's a very understanding and sort of approachable series in that regard. But it basically just follows these three, Mike now living in the house with the other two, introducing him to Japanese culture, but whilst that happens, Yaichi starts to question his own understandings of homosexuality, because there's a pretty large moment in this story, or in this volume, should I say, about how his brother came out to him, and he didn't really react in any sort of way. It was just oh, okay. But by not having any sort of, he says he didn't really, it didn't change his opinion of his brother in finding out that he was gay, but at the same time, they were never really the same. Their relationship wasn't as close, and that was due to sort of his own preconceptions of what homosexuality was, and how he thought, or what he thought that made his brother, now that with that realization. And how a non-reaction can be just as hurtful as a extremely over the top reaction in different ways. But yeah, it's done very, very well. And because it has Konna, and because it has sort of this child's inquisitiveness, it approaches these topics with genuine questioning, and doesn't it definitely plays to the fact she doesn't understand why people don't like other people because they're gay, or as well, which is sort of touched on in this book as well, with why people don't like foreigners, something that is especially prevalent in Japan. It's really, really, really good. Kagame, of course, not an author that necessarily a lot of people have read a lot of his work, but if you read, I really recommend this, especially if you're interested in actual gay comi stuff. If you want to support LGBT manga coming out of Japan, then this is one that I highly, highly recommend. Also, the hardcover's so cute. Look at it. Okay. And inside is also really cute. The end pages. Oh my gosh. You guys, it's so cute. It's really good. So yes, anyway. I'm so glad that we finally got this release. I'm looking forward to the second volume, whenever that may come out. But I'm glad that we're seeing more of this sort of release, although it's not really from a major publisher. I'm glad that Pantheon has sort of picked up the slack, and that we get such a well-regarded and award-winning manga as well. This is the sort of seinen series that people don't really think about as being seinen, because it's obviously handling topics that not necessarily people expect. But yes, it's so cute, it's really sweet, and just, oh my gosh, buy it, guys. Buy it. Oh my gosh, I keep hitting the window. Next is another older release. Probably unsurprisingly, a Natsume Ono release, and this is Tesoro, a bunch of short stories. And this is a lot of early work of Natsume Ono, released by Viz several years ago now at this point. It's pretty interesting because the inside is brown and white. I don't know if you can tell that well. Which is actually, like, they have specific printers that do that sort of thing. But yeah, a bunch of short stories, not really much to say aside that from, like, they're obviously variation in quality, and some are more interesting than others, but it means that I only have one more of these like single volume Ono releases to get, and then I can start buying House of Five Leaves, which I'm really looking forward to. Why I don't own that series yet, I don't know. But yeah, so my Natsume Ono collection will hopefully soonish be done. And yeah, but I'm sure if you're a fan of Ono stuff, you maybe already own this. It's good. I always like short story collections because they tend to show the breadth of variation of the artist, and yeah, you can really learn about certain creators through their work, especially early works like this. So yeah, I'm happy to finally own it. It's 2 volumes from the same series, and this is Dark Horse's recent release of Blade of the Immortal, Omnibus 1 and Omnibus 2. Hiroaki Samura's seinen about a immortal samurai, or samurai who has pledged to kill 1,000 people, 1,000 bad people, in redemption for the 100 that he killed during his non-immortal lifetime. It's very interesting. I've only read the first omnibus as of now. Pretty typical for this sort of era, like setting of era. Of course, like the Young Charge and the Bodyguard has been done to death within Japanese literature and sort of storytelling in general, although that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's just a staple of the genre, and it's done very interestingly. The immortality, of course, giving sort of a more fairy tale or folk tale-y spin on the story. There's some very interesting artistic spreads in this series. And there's some very creepy stuff, especially in the first volume, that I'm sure people who have read the series know what I'm talking about. I'm sure there's plenty in the rest of the series too, but volume 1 has some pretty weird stuff in there. For people not familiar with this release, it does actually say it on the first couple pages of this, but this is not a flipped manga, but the panels were rearranged to be read from left to right, comparatively from right to left, Japanese style, by Samura's insistence. It wasn't something that Dark Horse just did on their own. So this is basically just a repackaging of the singles, which were done in the same way. There's no way to read this in English in the typical right to left fashion, but you don't lose anything with the panels having been rearranged. There's all of the panels themselves are very they're done in a way that, like, it doesn't, they're all squares and rectangles, so there's nothing you're losing by reading, like rearranging them like that. But just wanted to tell people, because I know some people, when this was first released, got a bit iffy that it was flipped, which, like I said, it's not. The artwork hasn't been touched in any other way aside from the panels just being shuffled around, and it was by the author's insistence. It wasn't done to spite the fans or anything. It was actually done by Samura in encouragement for more Western readers to read it, because back when this was first coming out, the right to left reading format was not really accepted like it is now. I mean, it's standard for manga now, but when this series was first being released in English, that's not how it was. So it's sort of a testament and relic of the early days of manga translation in the West. So yeah, on that note, it is also very interesting in that regard. Next, speaking of a testament to history of manga being translated in the West, do I have another thing that applies to that? This is the most recent release of Barefoot Ken by Keiji Nakazawa. This was released by Last Gasp Publishing. And if you don't know anything about this story, it's an autobiographical or semi-autobiographical series about a young boy and his family before, during, and immediately preceding the bombing of Hiroshima. Of course, ending the Second World War. And I have all 4 of these hardcover releases. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if you have no sort of background of this series, this was the very first series to ever get translated into English in, I think, 74, 76, by what was then called the Project Gen. And it was done in sort of hopes and encouragement of awareness towards the, like, getting rid of nuclear warfare and atomic disaster and that sort of thing. So it's a very, very, not only is it very historically relevant and culturally relevant, especially, of course, within Japan, but the US as well, and the rest of the world. It's important in that it's done from the perspective, or it's written from the perspective of a civilian. It's not, unlike a lot of sort of wartime manga, this wasn't written by someone within the military. This was written by someone who was a child that just happened to live in Hiroshima during the war. And it's not only about, the American bombing and sort of the disaster that that destroyed the city, but how Japan as a culture sort of treated people from Hiroshima and Nagasaki afterwards. There were, refugees were treated as basically subhuman, diseased, and nobody wanted anything to do with them. People wouldn't hire them. It's a very harrowing look at all the consequences from the perspective of victims. So in that regard, this is a very, very, very important work. The translation itself has not been updated, I think, since its initial translation back in the 70s. This is a flipped manga, but understandably so. And you can see they actually use Comic Sans for the translation in here. So it's a bit of a like, oh, that's a weird thing that happened. But as for this edition, this was actually a Kickstarter release by Last Gasp in order to make these 4 hardcover releases. The series was initially released in 10 single, tankobons, years and years and years ago. I mean, you can still find copies floating around, but this re-release was done in encouragement to get them into actually middle school libraries in the US, and libraries around the US, but you can actually buy them at, on Amazon and other retailers and stuff. Very popular and successful Kickstarter. I'm very happy that they managed to reach their goal. And it's such a beautiful and lavish release for something that is and should be incredibly, incredibly important. If you have any interest in this sort of in this manga, I would highly recommend these newer re-releases. They are very beautiful. The hardcovers are fabulous. And I mean, the story itself is incredibly important even to this day. It's a historical it's sort of a historical treasure and something to be remembered. The manga itself is a treasure, not the event, of course. God, that would be awful. But the realities of war are something that the realities and consequences of war shouldn't be something that's forgotten. And having a perspective of victims who are actually affected, that's not something we always really get from wartime manga. So it is very different in that regards. I'm so glad. I would have been wanting to get this for a long time at this point. Like, probably over a year. I didn't back the Kickstarter. I was a little bit late for that. But I did. I mean, you can buy copies, like I said, on Amazon. I got mine from Book Depository. And so worth the wait. I'm happy to finally own them. And it's going to hurt rereading the series, but yeah. Anyway, very important and important manga. One I would maybe encourage you to try if this is if again historical manga is something that you're interested in. Barefoot Ken really formed a lot of what is later become like the anti-war manga movement within Japan. The series also got two anime films. I think they're both released in English as well, although I've never seen them. But yes, just something a little bit older and maybe not something a lot of people have heard of, but one that deserves to be remembered. And finally, this is the one volume that I got for my completion challenge. One that I bought quite a while ago, but it took some time to actually get to me. And that is volume 10 of Takahito Inoue's Vagabond in this Viz Big edition. So I now have the entire Viz Big collection for this series. It did take me a little while to get into this story, but once I actually compelled myself and dedicated time to reading it, I have really fallen in love with it now. After I understood like which direction it was taking with the story. Now that I have this volume, I can finally read 10, 11, 12 and sort of finish up with what has come out. I know people complain about this release, but I have zero problems with it. I never have any spine issues. I mean, they are heavy, but I tend to read at a table or in bed or sitting on a chair or something. I never really notice that it's particularly heavy. I wouldn't read it on a train or something. I wouldn't take it with me, but it's, I think heaviness shows you is an indication of paper quality, so I don't know why people are complaining. Don't people want better paper quality? I don't know, man. I don't know. Anyway, this is the only Inoue series that I've actually really read a huge amount of and own at all, full stop. Although I am a fan of Inoue, I've read I've actually read some of Real, back years and years ago, back when my library had copies of the first 4 or 5 volumes. Inoue, of course, is a very well-respected mangaka, and this particular series is sort of based on, well, it says based on Eiji Yoshikawa's Musashi, but that, of course, is based off of, like, Musashi's life and sort of speculative life, I guess. Very influential and well-known person within Japan's history. Whether or not he's a real person or not is sort of up for debate still, but yes. Or whether he's sort of an amalgamation of several people's achievements. Yeah, anyway. This is, like I said, final volume I need for the series to complete it. And it also means that I've finished another series for my completion challenge. I've completed it, so I feel like I've really achieved a lot of my wants for this challenge. I haven't filled all of them, but I've gotten there pretty quickly. I'm surprised. But yes, thank you all so much for watching. This was way longer than I anticipated, but I did drone on a lot about certain things, and I apologize for that. Ugh. But I hope you all enjoyed. There's not, it's not necessarily a massive haul of manga, but it's definitely something. There's a lot of, a pretty good mix of old and new stuff, I think. And, yeah, not incredibly filled, but, I can't complain.